Right, welcome everybody. We're going to talk about Tiger 231 of the 501st Battalion, the first Tiger captured in the West. And as far as the Western Allies knew, it's the first Tiger captured anywhere. And that's because even though the Soviets had captured a Tiger, they hadn't told the Western Allies about it yet. So Tiger 231, fascinating story. We're going to look at particularly at an account by the right hand of the two gentlemen you can see on the cover of my book about the history of the Tiger tank's development all the way from the precursors in the 1930s through the capture of Tiger 231 in January of 1943. The right-hand person there is a Canadian officer, Graham MacLachlan, whose account was discovered during the production of the second edition of this book. Now, this lecture was first delivered at TankFest 2022. I am recording this in 2023 and putting it online. At TankFest 2022, I had the pleasure to be accompanied in my lecture by Captain Graham MacLachlan's son. And he has kindly recorded his father's words from the account that his family kindly shared with me after reading the first edition of this book. So Tiger 231. Before we get to Tiger 231, we're just going to go over this timeline here. At the right-hand edge of the timeline is the date of capture of Tiger 231 itself. That is 31st of January 1943 in Tunisia. Now, the Tiger tank has a long design and development history, including its precursors, that goes into the 1930s. And it'd been around as a development project for a long time before any of the Allies discovered it. And that's the purpose of this timeline, to help you appreciate the length of time that Tiger was around before Allied intelligence really realized that it was around. So the first photograph I'm going to show you here, this is the first turreted pilot tank in the Tiger series. It was coded as V1, and this is a shot of V1 in the assembly plant on delivery. It is identical to all Tigers in the first production batch, except that this very first pilot had a raisable and lowerable armored shield that you can see on the nose, folded backwards onto the nose in front of the driver's plate, and it could be lowered in front of the tracks to protect the tracks during assaults. It was actually abandoned on further vehicles because of its contribution to nose heaviness. A Tiger tank was actually otherwise a very well balanced machine. So the date of delivery of V1 was the 15th of April 1942. None of the Allies had any intelligence of a Tiger program at all at this stage. The next dates I'm going to show you are in August. So there's an amazingly quick program progression for the Tiger series. 15th of April was the first pilot delivered. 19th of August is when the first Tiger tanks are delivered to a unit. That unit is the 502nd Battalion, Heavy Tank Battalion. That's not the battalion that's going to go to Tunisia. It goes to Russia. It's the first unit to deploy with Tigers. It never goes to Tunisia, which is where Tiger 231 of the 501st is going to be captured by Western Allies. So the 502nd receives its first 4 Tigers, 19th of August. There's a political hurry to get them on the front. We're under the silly idea that they're going to be decisive. Those first 4 Tigers are entrained within days, and they detrain eventually in Russia on the 29th of August. They go to the front pretty quickly. The first Tiger attack, not actually involving all 4 Tigers, because not all are available at the same time. First Tiger attack is 16th of September 1942. No casualties on the German side, and the Soviets don't record anything remarkable about a new tank. There's another attack on the 22nd of September 1942. Now this does involve a Tiger loss, but not into Soviet hands. And it is again not recorded by the Soviet side as a Tiger tank. At this stage, the Soviets are still ignorant of a Tiger tank as much as the Western allies are. That burnout, by the way, the Tiger tank is struck. It has an engine fire. There is no perforation from kinetic strikes. It does have an engine fire. It can't be recovered, and then it is demolished. And I believe this German photograph is a photograph of that very first Tiger. It matches the location and the early design. So it's 22nd of September 1942. The first hint that Western intelligence gets of the Tiger program is actually the 16th of September, coincidentally the first day, the day of the first Tiger attack on the Eastern Front. Now on the 16th of September 1942, there is a encrypted radio signal sent from Italy to German forces in North Africa, forewarning or prospecting the dispatch of, quote, Panzer VI Tigers to Africa. At this stage, Rommel is still inside Egypt. He's on the defensive, awaiting an Allied counteroffensive, which will come in October, and that is best known as the Battle of Alamein, although that was not the first Battle of Alamein. So the Germans are waiting for this counteroffensive, and they're waiting for Tiger tanks. British signals intercept the signal and also decrypt it thanks to the Ultra program. So the British know that there are Panzer VI Tigers in existence. They are in existence as in they're materially in existence, because the Germans are talking about dispatching them. This is a program a program of development they have not known about before. The tank is beyond development. It's in deployment or about to be deployed. So this is a bit of a shock. Now to corroborate this, after the counteroffensive from Alamein, during the German retreat, some document is picked up which mentions a Panzer VI. That document hasn't survived, but Middle East Command records the capture of that document. So the document itself has not survived, but its capture is recorded by Middle East Command and signaled back to Britain. So this corroborates that the Panzer VI Tiger exists. As it happens, there are no Panzer VI Tigers in Egypt. None were ever sent to Egypt. None were sent to that front, that particular front. They're going to be sent to what becomes the Western Front in North Africa. That's the one in Tunisia. But there are still history books which mistakenly say Tiger tanks were dispatched to Egypt. They would have been dispatched if the counteroffensive hadn't occurred just before Tiger tanks were ready to be inshipped from Italy to Africa. So the first Tigers land in Africa on the 23rd of November 1942. There are 3 Tigers in a batch. They're sent on this railway ferry, 3 of them, and accompanying Panzer III's, because that is how the Heavy Tank battalions were structured at the time, with a mix of Tiger tanks and Panzer III's. Both types of tank are shown in this photograph. That is the first Tiger tank to be loaded onto the ferry, and it will be the first Tiger tank to land in Africa. British signals intercepts know about the landing, but the decryption happens in Britain, not in Africa. The Allied army, it's actually a British first army, it's designated British, although it does have Allied troops in it, including Americans. The First Army is already in Tunisia. It's landed in Algeria and fought into Tunisia. It's expecting actually to conquer Tunisia before German or Italian intervention. There are no forces in Tunisia at the time of invasion. But the Germans and Italians get forces into Tunisia quicker than the Western Allies do. And that includes these heavy tanks, 23rd of November 1942. Now, the signals intercept doesn't get to First Army HQ for a week after the actual intercept. And that's important because by the time the intercept gets delivered to First Army HQ, that's pretty much the time when Tiger tanks are used in a counteroffensive, the first real counteroffensive by the Axis powers in Tunisia. And that's the 1st of December, 1942. And this is a photograph taken on the 1st of December, 1942 of probably the first Tiger tank to go into action in Africa. It is crossing the Jadida Bridge on its way to a counterattack near Taborba. So the counteroffensive has focused on Taborba, which is really the last big city on the main highway leading to Tunis. And if the Axis forces hadn't stopped the Allies' progress from Taborba, it would have been downhill to Tunis pretty much, literally and metaphorically. So this was a counteroffensive that stopped the Western Allied advance in 1942 and actually allowed the Axis forces to hold on to Tunisia until May of 1943. So that was the 1st of December 1942. The Western Allies still don't know they're fighting Tigers. So there were reports of Panzer IVs on the 1st of December, lots of Panzer IVs. In fact, Panzer IVs were in the minority. Most of the tanks on the German and Italian side were Panzer IIIs. So the Western Allies do fight Tigers on the 1st of December and on successive days, and they don't know about it. Now, they know for sure that Tiger tanks were in Tunisia when this photograph is published in the German press. This is the only Tiger tank to land in Tunis itself. The others are landed to the west of Tunis, including across beaches. This is the only Tiger to land in Tunis, and it's paraded and it's photographed and it's put in the press. And this is a big shock to Western intelligence. They don't know that other Tigers have already landed. So for as far as they know, a Tiger has landed, and this is the first Tiger. That's as far as they know. So they continue to think that they haven't fought Tiger tanks yet. Now, 14th of January 1943, the Soviets captured their first Tiger. Now, by this time, they already know about Tiger tanks because they've captured some documents. But they captured Tiger 121 of the 502nd Battalion while it is broken down and actually being repaired. So the repair crews and the fighting crews are surprised. And the Tiger is captured in a disabled but undamaged state. So the Soviets have a working Tiger. Essentially, they get it working, and there's documents in it that specify the Tiger tank in general. The Soviets don't share any of this intelligence with the Western Allies. 22nd of January 1943, the British capture a mechanic. He's a Panzer unit mechanic, and he is holding on his possession a photograph of a Tiger tank. Now, we know this because various war diaries record receiving copies of this photograph and that it is correctly identified as a Tiger tank. And it confirms that there are Tiger tanks in Tunisia. It doesn't necessarily confirm that Tiger tanks have been used in battle yet. But surprisingly, this photograph has not survived. Now, it is true war diaries are kept in the moment with the intelligence as received, and then when war diaries are turned back to the responsible authorities, they're usually known as official historians, who then later become archivists. The intelligence is usually scrubbed, deleted, burnt out of these war diaries. So it's not unusual to find war diaries referring to intelligence that you cannot find in the war diary. Sometimes you do get lucky. The intelligence that I write about is almost exclusively found in the Tank Museum because of the transfer of intelligence from the School of Tank Technology when that was closed down after the Second World War, and its documents were transferred to the Tank Museum. That contains most of the intelligence that has survived from the Second World War on the Western Allied side. So the photograph hasn't survived, but we know it was distributed. Now the next day, on a different part of the front, so there's no causal relationship between the capture of that photograph and the fate of this particular tiger. The very next day, the Americans unknowingly knock out a tiger. This is Tiger 122 of the 501st. They knock it out. One of their rounds penetrates near the engine compartment, starts a fire. That tiger is towed away. The Americans do not record fighting any tigers in that battle. They, like the British, do not record identifying any tigers up to this point, apart from in photographs. So all belligerents on the Allied side, so far as they know, they've been warned that tiger tanks are in the country and they're going to face them soon. But so far as they know, they actually haven't fought any. And that's because they haven't captured any. Now, the date when the Western Allies actually capture a tiger is the 31st of January, and they actually knock out 2, of which they're going to capture 1. And the one that capture is Tiger 231. But as I'll explain, they only capture it for 24 hours. Very curious story, which I have to get to. Now, Tiger 21 from the same company. So Tiger 21 is the second company commander's vehicle. This is a company that has not actually seen any action yet. So it's the first company that was in action since the 1st of December. The second company has just landed. This is its first action. Tiger 21 is the company commander's vehicle. It's the first one to be knocked out, and I'll show you where it's knocked out on the map. That one is not captured. It is towed away. Tiger 231 goes further than Tiger 21. It goes actually behind some of the British lines before it's knocked out, and therefore it's effectively within British lines when the Germans pause their attack. But as you'll see, the Germans do later in the day make another attack where they catch up to Tiger 231, blow it up, and they hope that they've destroyed enough evidence of Tiger 231 to stop the Allies getting all its specifications. So Tiger 21 and Tiger 231, these are the first 2 Tiger tanks that are knocked out by the British forces. They captured Tiger 231. Right, so let's look at the area where this battle is going to take. So the battle is known in most of the war diaries as Sidi Said Kabar, and as you'll see, that's not quite where the battle happens anyway. So we're in Tunisia, northern Tunisia. Let's have another look at this area. There is the same place, Sidi Said Kabar, southwest of Tunis. It is much further south than the battle that was fought for Taborba on the 1st of December 1942, and it's much hillier and denser country than the first battle, which contributes to some of the problems Tigers were having. Now I'm showing you here a 1 to 50,000 map from wartime. So this is actually the map that was being used by both sides. So it's a French map. It was reprinted by both sides. The British map, in this case, this is the British map, had an extra key or legend in the English language, but pretty much both sides were using this same map in these same colors. And interestingly, you can see there's no contours on this map. So this is the line of approach from the northeast of the map here, from top of frame down the highway, which is marked by this red, white dashed line, to the southwest, or bottom left corner of frame. Now the Germans possess the junctions that are ringed with the red circle, and they already possessed them before this particular battle because there was an earlier operation known as Operation Eilbote I, or the first Operation Eilbote, where the Tigers of First Company had led down this this highway and also down the highway to the south. Actually, their main destination was to the southeast. But they've captured this highway since earlier in January. Now, the blue circle is the furthest advance of British forces in response to Operation Eilbote II. So there is effectively a long length of ground of no man's land, effectively between that blue circle, which I'll show you is Sidi Said Kabar, and the red circle, which is at Sidi Zid Kabar, just to make the battlefield more confusing, and it helps to explain why the war diaries are so confused about where they fought, and then the histories are even worse, which is one of the reasons why this battle has been ignored, and the capture of Tiger 231 has practically been ignored or misrepresented. These are 1 to 50,000 maps of the blue squares are 1 kilometer across, or 1 kilometer squares, boxes. So you can see there's quite a sizable chunk of no man's land effectively between Sidi Said Kabar and Sidi Zid Kabar to the red circle to the top right of the blue circle. Right, we can zoom in on this. So just a few days before the Germans launch Operation Eilbote II, the British move up some forces up that highway beyond Sidi Zaid Kabar, which is at the bottom left of screen. So it's the same blue circle around Sidi Said Kabar as on the previous map. Now, the British forces had been sitting there for a month. This is mostly a French front, by the way, but the British are holding this left-hand corner of the front, and the front goes to the bottom right in a south-eastwards direction. Now, just a few days before Operation Eilbote II, British forces have moved from Sidi Said Kabar up to this bend in the highway, and they've put companies either side of the highway on hilly ground, quite widely distributed. But the idea is to use their weapons firing across the highway to effectively block the highway without actually having forces on the highway itself. Now, the red boxes are showing the timings of the arrival of various German forces as recorded in the British diaries. So some of the some of the German reports survive, but not any German diaries of the battle. So there are no timings, or very few timings, on the German side. So that's why we have to use the timings from the British side. And just to confuse it even more, the Germans and the British are using different clocks. So they're using different summer times, winter times, and so their timings are not the same. You have to mathematically adjust them. So forces have arrived before dawn. They've been heard, so tracked vehicles have been heard. And then as dawn approaches, some infantry can be seen. The blue lettered ovals are the companies of the Buffs, an British infantry regiment, which is holding this ground with some 6-pounder guns from a separate regiment, supplementing their 2-pounders, their brigade's 2-pounders. 6-pounders will be the main anti-tank weapon in this battle. So just to orient you to some imagery, so this image is taken of a Panzer IIIN, which was knocked out where that yellow cross is marked on the highway. So it was the second in a column of 3 tanks that were knocked out, with Tiger 231 being the first of them. So Tiger 231 was followed by 2 Panzer IIINs, which was the conventional way of doing it at that time in the force structure of the time. Tiger 21 was knocked out earlier. I'll show you in a zoomed in map in a moment. It didn't get as far. Tiger 21 did not get as far as any of those 3 knocked out panzers marked from the red cross, the yellow cross, and the white cross. Now we're looking at the Panzer IIIN, which is marked on the map as the yellow cross. This is it. This is the Panzer IIIN 242. Now the mosque is visible in this photograph 1,400 yards away, or 1,300 meters. If we go back to the map, the mosque is actually the main reference point for everybody. It's very visible, and it is effectively what is marked or named on the French map here as Sidi Zid Kabar, not to be confused with Sidi Said Kabar, which is where the British battalion headquarters is located. So there is the mosque, 1,400 yards away. It gives you an impression of the sort of terrain that we're dealing with. Now, this photograph was taken days later, after the battle, in much clearer weather and later in the day. So when the panzers first showed up, it would have been misty and light was low. It was dawn effectively, and not as visible as it is here. And that in those days, a range such as 1,400 yards was a long one, particularly with British weapons at the time. So there's the mosque. The other point that I'll show you on the map is point 456, 840 yards behind this tank, Panzer III 242. I'm going to go back to the map. Here is point 456 on the map. Remember, there's no contours on this map. Point 56 is a rise. It's effectively a ridge running north to south. And the panzers are invisible as they're coming from the top right of frame. They're coming southwestwards until they are invisible until they rise over that ridge, of which the highest point is point 456. So there's a ridge north to south. That's where the panzers are going to appear to the guns of A Company. They are not visible entirely to Company D or Company B. And in fact, there are no anti-tank guns with companies B or D. The anti-tank guns are concentrated to the left or west of Company B, and that's so that they can enfilade the highway there at very close range, in expectation that panzers are not going to cross that deep wadi and the wet ground. Remember, this is January. Tunisia is much wetter than the rest of North Africa. There's no expectation panzers are going to cross except along the highway. So that gives you an idea of the sort of terrain we're talking about. Here's a close-up on point 456, or the ridge that we know by the marking there, 456. So the red arrow shows you where the panzers come up to the top of that ridge, and then they're visible and they come within line of sight and then line of fire of the anti-tank guns of Company A, as well as the anti-tank guns to the south. Now, the ones to the south are too far away to threaten Tiger tanks. The intelligence on Tiger tanks is accurate enough, given the signals intelligence, to know that the thickest armor is 100 millimeters. And the anti-tank gunners have been told to assume that they should not attack the front of Tiger tanks, the same as they're told not to attack the fronts of Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs now that they've received face-hardened applique armor on their fronts. So these gunners are already looking for side flanking shots, and that's important to this battle. So the 6-pounders from A Company start to fire at the panzers as they come over that ridge. The first one is Tiger II-1. The closest of the 6-pounders is marked by that blue circle with a 1 in it, and those numbers are the numbers of the guns as recorded by the unit itself. So it's number 1 gun. There are 4 guns, 1 through 4, with A Company. A Company is in the oval, and it's in a very tight perimeter on top of the hill. And I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. And it's got guns very well hidden, dug in and hidden. And in fact, it seems that the panzers never positively identified any of these guns' locations. So these guns start opening fire, the closest at 600 yards, 550 meters. That's not close enough to threaten the front, but they do score hits. I'm going to show you this photograph of Tiger II-31. not to jump ahead to the capture of Tiger 231, but to show you the hill on which Company A is located. I'm going to use my mouse here to show you this slope. So the hill that Company A is on is not the scrubby horizon in the far distance. They're on this slope that is nearer to the camera. So this slope is pretty much where the highway is following. And then the hill slopes up to Company A. And the positions are very well dug in and hidden, and they're not clear in this photograph. This photograph was taken on the day of capture, so it's on the day of the battle. You cannot see any of the positions of Company A, but Company A's positions are very well plotted in the war diaries. We know it was there, and the gun positions are plotted on a separate map kept by the anti-tank unit that was there. So we know where their locations are. The grid references are good enough for that, but they're so well hidden you can't see them in this photograph, and there's no photographs of the company positions any closer than this. This is a photograph not of the company positions, it's of Tiger 231. So this is the best photograph I can show you of Company A's positions. So that's the hill they're on. By the way, that slope is not connected with this nearer hill here. So this higher hill, there are no forces on that higher hill. That's a separate hill, and it's closer to Tiger 231 than the hill that Company A is on. These two hills are not connected.
The leading tank turned its machine guns on the mines, and after several had exploded, a German stepped out of the turret and began clearing a path by throwing others aside. My leading platoon's Brenz opened, but before he was hit, the mines were removed. It was a daring act, praised by my men.
So Tiger 2-1 crosses over the ridge that we know by that highest point of 456. That's, by the way, an elevation in meters. This is a French map, so everything is in metric. Remember, the boxes are 1 kilometer boxes. So Tiger 2-1 starts receiving fire on its front from 600 yards away. It continues to advance. It is receiving fire from the side at 1,100 yards or 1,000 meters, and that is definitely a range at which the 6-pounders, with the shots they had at the time, which are uncapped AP armor-piercing shots, that's a range that the shots cannot threaten the Tiger, and indeed it cannot threaten the Tiger's sides, although there are plenty of impacts on the sides, and at the closer range, even at the closer range, the same shots cannot threaten the Tiger's front either. So the Tiger 2-1 continues to advance, and it gets to a point probably 400 yards away from gun 1. And it decides the fire is too thick, or it decides it's going to take the track north and then westwards and get behind Company A, or get flanking fire on the guns that it cannot, who are firing at its front, but it cannot locate exactly where they're firing from. So in my interpretation of the evidence, the Tiger Tank 2-1 is going to turn up that track north and then westwards, and that's when it's going to start receiving side shots. So how do we know that? This is a sketch, there are 2 sketches here actually from the German report by 501st Unit. So remember, Tiger 2-1 is never captured by the Allies, it's never examined or photographed by the Allies. The Germans eventually recover it, and they plot all the strikes. So you can see there are lots of strikes on its front, and those are non-perforations. So they are circles, but they're not infilled. So the German engineer is recording impacts without perforation as circles without infilling the circle. So there's no perforations on the front. But the left-hand side receives a lot of hits. Now, some of those hits could be from the distant gun to the south as it is advancing along the highway. But that gun, 1,100 yards away, could not cause these perforations. So these perforations must have come at a closer range, say 400 yards away, by those guns that are with Company A. Now, these perforations are low enough in energy that the shots perforate without damaging anything internally. The perforation that probably stopped the tank is the one at the very front on the side plate near the driver's position. So the driver was not killed, and he doesn't seem to have been injured either, but there was a hole in the side, and that caused the crew to evacuate. There may have been some damage, unrecorded damage to the driving instruments or something that caused the crew to abandon the vehicle. So they do abandon the vehicle, but it's going to be towed away by Panzer III's. So Tiger II-1 is knocked out, but not within Allied lines.
The guns were defilated on one side, so the tanks can be dealt with one at a time, without the following tanks being able to see the source of the fire until it is too late.
So after Tiger II-1's stoppage, it retreats with a broken track according to the impacts plotted by the German engineer after the battle. And it withdraws some way. It probably fouls that front drive on its broken track, and then it's towed away by the Panzer III's. The next Tiger to advance is Tiger 231, and it's got two Panzer III's behind it. Tiger 231 advances without neutralizing any of the threats that have fired on Tiger 2-1, and it's also in ignorance of the fact that there are more threats to its south. So remember the numbered circles there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are 6-pounder guns. The circles with X's are 2-pounder guns. So they are placed much closer to the highway in the hope that they can do some damage. They're actually not going to fire on the Tigers at all. There's no need. The range at which the guns, number 5 gun, number 6 gun opens fire on Tiger 231 is probably around 680 yards, 622 meters. They would have been triangulating on the point where that yellow cross is, which is actually where the 1st Panzer IIIn is destroyed. So we know from the unit, the anti-tank unit's report, that they started firing at around this range, and that the shots were not perforating. The Tiger continued to advance, and it advanced as far as that red cross before it gets knocked out. What is the difference? It's the angle of attack. So when it receives impacts at the point where that yellow cross is marked, there's an oblique angle. By the time it reaches the point where it's knocked out, where that red cross is, the angle of attack is effectively perpendicular to the side of the tank, and that it is at that point that it gets perforated. So it starts to receive fire. This is a photograph taken pretty much immediately after it's knocked out. We haven't got to the knockout shots yet. These are the shots that it first received, or at least the shots that first impacted. So there may have been some shots that missed it. But these are the shots plotted by technical investigators later as shots that first hit without perforating. Then the Tiger 231, it advances to where it's eventually knocked out. It has to negotiate around this Valentine tank, which was blown up on a mine days earlier, as recorded in the war diaries, despite the misreports you'll see in histories that the Valentine tank was engaged with this Tiger tank. It was not. It was knocked out earlier. So the tank gunners have lined up their guns on this point. This is the optimal point for them to destroy tanks, because they know that any German panzers have to negotiate around this knocked out Valentine tank. And also there's an aiming point in the form of this culvert. And also the highway is embanked on both sides here. So the Tiger tank is high and exposed with a backlit sky. It's short range. These are perfect conditions for the weapons of the time. It's side on to the tank. So this is where the tank gunners will have optimized for shooting, and this is where they get their kill shots. Now we're going back to the map to show you the angles of attack and the ranges. So for number 6 gun, The range was as short as 380 yards or 350 yards, and all technical tables show that it's perfectly capable for a uncapped AP shot at the time to perforate the 60, 80 millimeters on the side plates, so two different plates, 60 millimeters, 80 millimeters. Tiger, the number 7 gun has a wider angle on Tiger 231, but gets some perforations in because on the turret, because of the angle at which the turret is turned. Now, you can see in this photograph, the turret is not turned towards the guns. It is turned to the right for some reason. That's probably because the commander spotted British troops to the right of the highway, much further away. The crew was receiving shots, but they were buttoned up, and they did not plot where the threats were exactly. So the turret is turned away and not firing on the threats. And it means that the side of the Tiger tank's turret is receiving shots closer towards the front of the turret because the turret is turned towards the right. So these purple arrows are showing you perforations of that side turret plate. 3 perforations, in fact. We don't have any crew reports. Possibly crew were killed. In fact, there's a recording in the Buff's war diary of the capture of 3 crewmen who may have come from the Panzer III's, but since they recorded one of them as a lieutenant or lieutenant who should have been riding in this particular tank, it's probable that at least three survived. It's possible that all 5 survived from Tiger 231 and only 3 were captured, or 2 were killed inside the tank, and most likely place they were to have been killed would be in the turret because of these impacts. Perforations, in fact, 3 perforations. Blue arrows show further strikes which do not perforate. So this is on the 80 millimeter plate. All of these blue arrows are non-perforations at pretty much perpendicular strike angles. There's a perforation of a wheel here, low down. The shot continues under the Tiger tank without further damage to the tank. Then there's a perforation of a wheel towards the top of the wheel, and that is high enough that it goes through the 60 millimeter plate and into the engine compartment and starts a fire. And that is what stops the Tiger tank and eventually causes the crew to bail out. And you can see blackening of the rear of the turret and the rear of the engine compartment, and in fact blackening around the perforations where smoke has discolored the outside of the tank. So these are the strikes by the time Tiger 231 is stopped. Now, by a curious twist of fate, there are 2 Canadians involved in the capture and exploitation of Tiger 231. One of them is in the bottom right corner, Graham MacLachlan, who commanded Company A. So these 2 Canadians have rotated with British First Army from the Canadian Army in the British Isles for experience. So they're on temporary rotation, 3-month rotations. The other Canadian there is a Royal Canadian engineer, Major Brown. As soon as he hears of the capture of this unusual tank, he rushes up on a motorbike. In fact, you saw his motorbike in an earlier photograph. And he starts taking photographs. And that is probably him, as photographed here in front of this Tiger tank. He may have a camera in his hands. He is injured later in the day, so he doesn't get to participate in the full exploitation. Later in the day, the Tiger tank is recaptured by the Germans and blown up. And yet, the wreck is still yielding secrets to technicians who arrive a few days later from British First Army HQ. And for the full story of that, you'll have to read the book. Thank you for listening.